Welcome, everybody, to the Beards and Bible podcast. My name is Josh, and it is wonderful to be with you all wherever you are listening to this, whether you're working out or driving in the car or cleaning your house or whatever you're doing. It's interesting always to me when people tell me where they listen to our podcast. There's some folks that have told me that they had a weekend project they were doing and they absolutely binged Beards and Bible podcast, and that Gabe and I were in their ears for the entire weekend. That's very interesting and kind of terrifying. So if I'm in your ears while you're mopping your floor, man, you missed a spot. So keep mopping. It's just me today. Gabe is actually celebrating with his congregation. As many of you know, he is a leader of a Messianic Jewish congregation in Dothan, Alabama, and he is celebrating Sukkot with his congregation this week. So they are camping outside every single night this week, and so he was a bit tied up and couldn't be with us today. I am actually flying out to go to El Salvador on Friday. So in between everything going on, him with his congregation, me trying to get out the door, packed up, doing a wedding between me and flying out. I decided to go solo today for that. So hope you're doing well. Hope your fall is going well so far. It doesn't feel like fall where we're at. Gabe says it's very, very hot in Dothan, Alabama, in LA, Lower Alabama. It's been in the 80s here in Middle Tennessee. So today feels nice, though. Today feels real nice. Today feels high 60s, lower 70s. So that's kind of fall-ish. So a lot to talk about today. Lots of stuff happening in the world. Thank you for everyone who listened to our last episode on the Charlie Kirk assassination and your thoughts and your feedback with that one. There's a lot going on in the world. Really kind of the big stuff going on in the news cycle right now is there is a government shutdown in Washington, D.C. And so if you are listening in the U.S., you know that that's affecting everybody, at least in some level. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. We have the 2-year anniversary of the October 7th attacks in Israel and the ongoing conflict against Hamas in the Gaza Strip and everything going on with that. And then what's interesting is while all this stuff is going on, we've been going through Mark chapter 13 with our congregation here in Middle Tennessee at Experience Community Church. And so I thought it'd be interesting just to crack our Bibles open and look at what Jesus teaches us about hope and what Jesus teaches us about trials and the end times and how we're supposed to be ready for whatever comes our way and how he promised us that it wasn't always going to be easy as we get closer to the end. So we'll kind of be jumping around a little bit this episode, but thanks for coming along for the ride. So let's dive in. First part, U.S. government shutdown. If you are living under a rock, maybe you didn't know that, but if you're engaged at all in what's happening in the news, this is what everybody is talking about. Not everybody, just everybody. So what's happening? Why is it happening? The federal fiscal year began on October 1st. And so for months, both sides were arguing back and forth really between what they wanted, what they didn't want. And so every year Congress has to pass basically 12 funding bills, or at least a temporary fix that's called a continuing resolution. So this year, surprise, surprise, they didn't. So what do Republicans want? Republicans want this moment to be about continuing the Trump administration's agenda with the big, beautiful bill, and really wanted to cut spending, roll back certain healthcare subsidies, particularly healthcare for non-citizens of the U.S. They did not think it was right. The American people did not vote for non-citizens to be covered under certain healthcare subsidies, and pushed for really what the Republican Party is calling fiscal discipline. And the Democrats instead want to protect those programs, and they want to keep the government running without any major cuts. And really, it's kind of an opportunity in the minds of many Democrats to appear as though they're standing strong against the Trump administration, because, as we all know, next year is midterm elections. And so many Democrats see this as their opportunity to show that they are tough against Trump, and they're standing up to Trump. They're standing up to the Trump administration. So what does that mean for us? Okay, well, both sides are kind of locked in to this basically game of political chicken, and the federal government has been shut down, essentially. About 750,000 federal workers are without pay, which is kind of crazy. Shutdowns have happened before. They've really been going on since the 1970s. Every few years, it's been like a reoccurring feature of U.S. politics. And Congress had kind of been operating for a number of years on these continuing resolutions and stopgaps. And no agreement was reached on what the budget needed to be, full federal funding. So at 12:01 a.m. on October 1st, a shutdown began. And here's kind of what I've been thinking. If this is like a reoccurring theme of U.S. politics, budget fights between kind of two ideas of what government should it be big government with a lot of different programs? Should it be smaller government? Should subsidies cover groups such as those who are here in our country illegally? Should it not? And there's two competing agendas for how these things are to work. And so this is so common. Like, why does this still feel like this historic crisis every single time? I think it has something to do with just the news cycle hopping in there, stoking the fires. Both sides are blaming each other. The Democrats are blaming the Republicans, saying that the Trump administration is the one responsible. All across government websites that are now run by the Trump administration, there's blame on the Democrats that this is Chuck Schumer's, which Chuck Schumer is a popular Democrat. He's a Democrat minority or majority leader. That it's his shutdown. So, yeah, both sides are blaming each other. I don't know why this side, everything's historic. 2024 is a historic election. This is a historic shutdown. Okay, that very well may be. History will prove that point. But here's really what's at stake. And here's what both sides want: for the government to be reopened, because this is affecting a lot of people. I'll just talk about real world ripple effects. A government shutdown means about 750,000 federal workers are furloughed, or they are working without pay. It means federal contractors are really hit hard, since their pay and their contracts are not guaranteed. Some agencies have actively started planning layoffs or reductions if this budget lapse continues. Practically things like national parks, museums, monuments, federal tours of the Capitol building, the White House, they're being canceled or scaled back. Certain programs and federal data, such as Social Security cost of living adjustments, certain announcements, USDA food programs, certain IRS functions, and other social programs are delayed or paused. So that's one ripple effect, which I don't know how the IRS being delayed or paused is bad news for any of us. But anyway, airports and air travel are strained. So we're flying out to El Salvador Friday morning with a missions team here, and we were messaging back and forth about delays at the Nashville airport due to fewer air traffic controllers who are already short-staffed. And so major hubs are experiencing some travel delays. But more than that, just like an economic impact. Like every week of shutdown, here's what analysts are saying. This is crazy to me. Every week of shutdown could cost billions in lost GDP for our nation as a whole. Consumer spending, and then just delay in certain investments. So even though it may feel like just a bunch of politicians squabbling in Congress, which it kind of is, It does have a trickle-down effect on us. And here's the crazy part. I read this number today. 70% of Americans disapprove of the shutdown and don't believe it's worth the risk. 70%, that's crazy. And here's kind of what it feels like. It kind of feels like we are on the side of the road and mom and dad are driving the car, and mom and dad have been arguing and not getting along for like years. And the car broke down on the side of the road, and we're the back seat passengers, we're the kids, and mom and dad are on the side of the highway screaming at each other. Meanwhile, the car's on the side of the road and the engine's still smoking. And instead of trying to fix the engine, they're both screaming at each other and blaming each other. It's kind of what it feels like. Because Republicans are blaming the Democrats for making policy demands. The Democrats are accusing the GOP of weaponizing shutdowns for leverage. And I think we can learn from this as Christians is that government is not the solution to the brokenness of our nation, that the system will always falter, that the system is always imperfect. And so, yeah, there's a lot of real world effects. There's a lot of real world consequences for this. How does this get resolved? How do we get out of this mess? Well, what the Democrats want is they want to preserve healthcare tax credit and subsidies for what they're saying are low and moderate income Americans. What Republicans want are spending levels and cuts and rescissions. They're wanting to continue to reduce spending, rescissions and clawbacks on previously approved expenditure lines. So really a continuation of what the Trump administration kind of already put into action with the big, beautiful bill. And so, the way that we get out of this mess is essentially there's some compromise on either side. And right now it doesn't look like there is any sort of budging on either side. And this has been going on for about a week. The Trump administration is threatening mass layoffs of federal workers and to continue to cut federal programs if the shutdown continues to drag on, which is kind of a negotiation tactic. So Senate Majority Leader John Thune has said that votes will be repeated on competing bills over and over again, I guess, effectively making each side really double down on their position related to this. And so, that's kind of where we are. We're a week in. Not much progress has happened. It just kind of feels like the politicalization, is that the word? That's the word, politicalization. Yeah. The division, the polarization, that's a better word, of our nation has kind of reached this fever pitch to where now we are essentially screaming at each other so much that we can't even run a government together because there are two completely different visions for how the government should be run in the nation that we are. And it's honestly a little bit scary, to be honest. What is it that unites us? What is a shared vision of America? Because I think for me, it just seems like when you study American history, in times of crisis, the American people rose to the occasion and were able to put perhaps partisan politics aside to work for what's best for the citizens of this nation. And I just don't feel like the elected officials right now have shown us that they care to do that both of them are really interested more in partisan politics than they are what's best for the citizens of this nation. Now, one could argue, well, the reason that they're tough and the reason they're not bending to the other side is because they're putting the good of our citizens first, and that very well may be. But that's going to be a hard sell when 70% of Americans look at the shutdown and say, this is absurd, this is ridiculous. You guys can't work together. You guys can't figure this out. And so let's hope and pray that this shutdown ends very soon and we are able to at least get back to some semblance of, I don't even want to say the word normalcy, because normalcy is not really what we've seen in our nation for a long time, some semblance of unity. How's that? Is that better? Unity? No, that seems like such a crazy word right now because unity sounds like weakness in the minds of some people. Working with people you disagree with for a common good sounds like weakness in the minds of some people. I don't think it is. I think it's a sign of strength. I think it's a sign of American virtue that we can put secondary differences aside and that we can find common ground and we can figure out how to work together. We've been able to do that in the past. I don't know why that's such a elusive virtue in the place that we're at right now, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at. There's a stalemate in the Senate. There's a circulating memo from the White House on back pay, basically that back pay for furloughed workers is not going to happen, which is a new thing. It's never happened before. And so, furloughed workers in previous shutdowns have always worked without their paychecks, knowing they're going to get back pay after this is over. But there's a memo basically saying that's not going to happen. So we'll see. We'll see if that's just a negotiation tactic or that's actually going to happen. So there's a talk of negotiating parts of the healthcare subsidies separately, or maybe decoupling some controversial riders to maybe get a clean continuing resolution passed. And maybe let's pass the budget and then we'll go back and kind of hammer it out later. But we don't know. We don't know who's going to blink first. We don't know who's going to be the bigger person first. So really three possible options. First is a short-term continued resolution. Both sides just agree they're going to reopen the government and they'll negotiate it later. I hope that's what ends up happening. Second option could be a partial agreement with some carve-outs. Some agencies or priorities would be funded. Others would perhaps be held hostage to some demands by certain groups. Or there could be a longer standoff that would just cause deeper damage to the economy, to growing political costs. I would think the greatest danger if there was a longer standoff would just be the deepening of political divides in our nation. So there could be some crazy wild cards thrown in. There could be lawsuits over back pay, which if I was a government worker and I didn't get back pay and I worked for free, I think I'd probably sue the federal government. There could be internal dissent in either party. I think even in the Democratic Party, guys like John Fetterman have kind of gone against party lines and voted to pass continuing resolutions, even though his party is not. So that's been interesting to see. There could be public backlash. We're already seeing that again. 70% of Americans say they are not in favor of this shutdown. There could be media pressure. It is so interesting to me to watch what the media is saying about this. You turn on MSNBC, it's all about Donald Trump shutting down the government. You turn on Fox News, it's Chuck Schumer's shutdown and the Democrats shutdown. So, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what is going to happen and occur because of media pressure related to this? But yeah, this could go on for a month. This could go on for another 2 or 3 weeks. Who knows? We'll see. This could possibly reshape how future federal budgets are negotiated. This could continue to cause lasting damage to our public faith in the government. I think that's probably what it's doing more than anything. But there we go. That's what's happening with that. And so, let's be praying that it doesn't last longer than it needs to, and let's be praying that people end up figuring it out sooner rather than later. So we'll turn our attention now to what's happening in the Holy Land or in the Middle East. So we've been talking about gridlock and destabilization and all sorts of breakdowns. So yesterday, October 7th, was the 2-year anniversary of the conflict that's been going on in Israel and in Gaza. It's hard to believe that it was 2 years ago, but if you did not see the story or you forgot the story, or maybe because of the media, public sentiment has changed and we've kind of forgotten how horrible and devastating it was in 2023 on October 7th, Hamas, which still is the governing party in what is the Gaza Strip, which is essentially a terrorist organization, launched a massive coordinated attack on Israeli towns all along the border of the Gaza Strip. And there were mass shootings, there were kidnappings, there were stabbings, there were sexual assaults, there were rockets that were launched. It was a horrible, bloody day, and there were 1,200 Israelis who were killed. There were 251 who were abducted and held hostage and taken back into Gaza. So all those attacks were really focused around different villages in the southern part of Israel, right on the border of Gaza. And there were all these different massive just attacks from rockets across the nation. And obviously, this event escalated into a full-scale war between Israel and Hamas. And Gaza has really been the epicenter of this war. And so much media coverage has happened, so much, I think, controversy has erupted in a lot of cities around the world, particularly the cry to free Palestine. And it's turned into, again, one more political hot button. What side you're on is whether or not you stand with Israel, you stand with Palestine. And I think in the midst of that, October 7th has kind of just, in the minds of some people at least, I don't want to say all people, because those listening who are Jewish, I'm sure for you still think of October 7th in the way that it should be remembered. But I think at least in the minds of popular media, we've gotten so caught up in the war in Gaza that we've forgotten about really what it was that kickstarted the war, and that was October 7th. And what was October 7th to the nation of Israel? It was a watershed moment. It was a tragedy. It was a reminder, a very painful reminder, that there are many people in our world that believe that the nation of Israel does not have the right to exist. And someone is worthy of being exterminated, and someone is worthy of being completely wiped off the face of the map simply because they're Jewish. And I think anyone that's paying attention can see that this is a very, very old mindset that I would just submit as a very demonic mindset, and that's the mindset of anti-Semitism. It's been interesting to me. I consider myself a political moderate, but I tend to be fairly conservative on most issues. It's interesting to me to just see the kind of slowly growing anti-Semitism that seems to be breaking out in conservative culture. And when I say conservative culture, I'm talking mainly conservative media. Hearing people like Candace Owens say the kind of things that she said against Israel and against the Jewish people. Some of the same blood libels against Israel and the Jewish people that were told in the early 20th century that led to the rise of the Nazis in Germany. And if you think I'm being inflammatory, I'm exaggerating, I encourage you to go back and study what Henry Ford and others believed about the Jewish people and the secret cabal of Jews that were running the world and all these kinds of things. And it just seems crazy to me that the oldest and laziest conspiracy theory in the world is this: when you don't understand why something is the way it is in the world, blame the Jews. Blame the Jews. And it's really weird seeing that in conservative media when 2 years ago on October 7th, so many rightly called the October 7th attacks what they were. They're just flat out evil. And then as this war has continued to drag on, more and more people have come out with some pretty absurd anti-Semitism on the right, and it's been pretty shocking to see, frankly. But what's happened in the war so far? Well, after the attack, Israel launched major operations in Gaza, and it was essentially to attempt to dismantle Hamas's military infrastructure. So there was a siege on Gaza City from November 2023 until January 2025. There were hundreds of thousands who were trapped inside Gaza City. Neighborhoods were destroyed. There was famine. There were hospitals that were overwhelmed. Throughout this 2-year conflict, there have been intermittent ceasefires. There have been truces. There have been pauses. But none of them have lasted long. None of them have been comprehensive. In March of 2025, Israel launched an offensive that ended a temporary ceasefire, which was caused the death of hundreds more. And so the war has continued to drag on. Many people have blamed Israel for invading Gaza, taking out Hamas, and many people have blamed Israel for all the atrocities happening in Gaza right now. And others have said that Israel has the right to go after this terrorist group, Hamas. That's the governing political group that's in Gaza, and it has to be a total war, that Israel will never truly be free to live in their land without fear of being attacked with another October 7th style attack until Hamas is removed from power. And so that's really the competing mindsets of this. Is there's one side that says Israel should engage in a total war and completely remove Hamas. The other side says that Israel should let Palestine be free, offer a 2-state solution, whatever the case is. And so I think within the shouting both sides of each other, identity politics, I think the nuances of how difficult it is to really just end this thing has become, and I think we probably all could do well to just maybe take a step back and just sort of look at it for what it is. The realities of how long this conflict has raged on, the realities of the mindset of Hamas and those who have grown up in Hamas, in the sense that they truly do want the extermination of the Jewish people. In many of these pro-Palestinian rallies across major cities in the world, there's a chant that says, from the ocean, or what is it? From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. So you have to ask what river, what sea. And if you look on a map, the sea is the Mediterranean Sea. The river is on the other side of Israel. That's the Jordan River. Essentially, that chant means there shall be no more Israel, because Israel will be wiped out and Palestine will be free. No more Israel, no more Jews. I think there's a lot of people that don't understand that kind of demonic hatred towards the Jewish people that many have, that have been indoctrinated with that kind of hatred from generational. And so I think it's a very complicated situation. But as the war has dragged on, new fractures have emerged. In early October, Hamas conducted a raid against a local clan who apparently was rebelling against some of the leadership there in Gaza. And so that is a sign, essentially, that Hamas is beginning to lose centralized authority. And there's internal struggles within Gaza. There's some people waking up to the fact that Hamas does not have their best interest in mind. So there's internal conflict there. But the cost of human lives has been staggering. It's been staggering. Even if you fall on the side that says that Hamas must be taken out of power and this is a total war and it can't be ended until Hamas is removed. Okay, you have to, at least in your humanity, take a step back and say, man, that the cost of this in terms of human lives have just been absolutely heartbreaking. 67,000 Palestinians killed. 30% of them children. Hospitals, schools, water systems, electricity grids damaged, destroyed, 90% of the population displaced, food insecurity, public health collapse, lack of sanitation, shortage of medical supplies. This is what happens in war. War is a horrible, 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 horrible thing. And even if you do believe that this is a justifiable war that should be waged in order to displace Hamas from leadership there in Gaza, you have to at least take a step back and say, humanity loses the longer this thing goes on. So it's got to come to an end. It needs to. Hostage exchange continues to remain a very important issue. Israel has demanded full release. Hamas will not release the surviving hostages unless there are guarantees. For Gaza, there are political concessions. So we had the anniversary yesterday, October 7th. Hamas has appeared this last week open to a deal based on Donald Trump's plan, though with some conditions. But they've backed out of many ceasefires and many plans before, several times, so this is not anything really noteworthy. I mean, we shouldn't be too excited about that just yet. So, yeah, it's bad. It's been bad for a while. So there's no full peace deal yet. Negotiations have stalled on core issues. And really, it seems like what Israel wants and what the U.S. for now is backing is complete disarmament of Hamas. And what Gaza wants, or the Palestinians want, or Hamas wants, is just the Israeli withdrawal to get out of Gaza. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. And as, again, this is the theme, word of the day, stalemate. I think that's the word of the day. Anybody remember Pee-wee's Playhouse? When somebody would say the word of the day, they'd say, you said the word of the day. Nobody remembers Pee-wee's Playhouse. Anyway, word of the day, stalemate. Stalemate, the government shutdown. There's a stalemate now in the war in Gaza. But yeah, that's kind of where we are. And in conflicts like this, I think both in the war in Gaza and in government shutdown, hope just seems like a very distant idea. But I don't think we as Christians should be hopeless. We should still continue to pray for peace in Israel. Actually, that's what the word says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So I think we should be praying for the peace of Jerusalem, praying for the people of Israel. We should stay faithful. We should stay compassionate. I think I would just say to anybody listening that has a very strong opinion one way or the other on this conflict, I think my counsel to you would be to take a step back and see the humanity in it on both sides of it. See the humanity in the people in Gaza that are suffering. 67,000 human beings, 30% who are children, have died so far. I mean, that's a big number. And I think we should be mourning for that. If you're one of those people, free Palestine, and there should be no war or whatever, okay, I think you need to stop and just read some of the witness testimonies of the October 7th attack and some of the violent anti-Semitism that is espoused and continually and actively espoused by people in positions of leadership there in Gaza and Hamas. And ask yourself that question. If you were a citizen of a nation and you knew people right across the border wanted to wipe you off the face of the map and they were not going to stop continuing to attack and murder your family and your children and send rockets, would you just want to say, okay, guys, sorry, we're just going to leave you alone as you continue to want to attack us and launch rockets into our nation? Or would you want to say, we have to wage a war until they're completely removed from power? What would you do? I think when we reframe the humanity of it, I think maybe we have a little bit more compassion for just how heartbreaking this conflict is on either sides. But I think what we can do is we can pray. I think we can educate ourselves. We can support credible humanitarian aid if you feel led to do so. We can engage in thoughtful discussions about this instead of just, again, latching to one side or the other and using that as a chance to fall in line with identity politics. And we can continue to commit to not find our hope in the things of this world. So in the midst of all this, in the midst of the instabilities, both with government shutdowns, the 2-year anniversary of Hamas, the fear, the grief, all of this, we are going through the Gospel of Mark at church. And I've never talked to Mark before. I've talked to Matthew. And Matthew gives a very interesting account of Jesus's teaching on the Mount of Olives about end times, and Mark also does as well in Mark chapter 13. And so it goes something like this if you've never read Mark chapter 13. Jesus and his disciples are leaving the temple in Jerusalem. Temple in Jerusalem, we know, would have been one of the most impressive architectural masterpieces in the ancient world. And to these young men, to these disciples, it would have been a sign of national identity. That we are the people of God. God is with us because look at our temple. Look how amazing it is, how big it is. It's awesome. And they say to Jesus, Jesus, look at what amazing buildings. And Jesus says, truly, I tell you, not one stone will be left atop another. This entire temple will be destroyed. It's a bit of a mood killer. But history tells us that in the year 70 AD, the temple was destroyed by Rome, and Jesus saw it coming. And so Mark 13, if you've never read it, really has 3 big movements. First is Jesus is predicting the fall of Jerusalem, destruction of the temple. He says it's going to happen in this very generation, boys. Don't put your hope and trust and faith in buildings and institutions, because those are unstable. Those things could fall. Secondly, Jesus warns about tribulation that they're going to go through, persecution and hardships that they're going to go through. They're going to endure deception, false messiahs, tribulations. But then Jesus gives a promise that he's going to come back. And he's going to gather his elect. He's going to gather his people from the 4 winds of the earth. And in the end, no matter how unstable, no matter how volatile the kingdoms of this world become, or the kingdoms of this world get, in the end, Jesus is going to reign and rule. And so I find this very timely to be going through this as a church, because as we look at our world around us and we see the instability, we see the lack of hope in government systems. Jesus is saying, hey, don't panic. I told you these things in advance so that you'll be ready, so that you won't be alarmed, is actually what he says. See that you are not alarmed. That when wars and rumors of wars happen, that when we see earthquakes and persecution and deception, Jesus says that's not the end. Those are the birth pains that lead up to the end. But you keep your eyes fixed on me. I think it's interesting he warns against deception. We're seeing a lot of that in our world. I would say it's kind of twofold. I think there's political deception happening in our world. I would say there's a lot of sociological deception happening in our world. But underneath political deception, sociological deception, there's always an element of spiritual deception. And there will be always people claiming to stand for what is the right side of history on a matter. But really what they're doing is they're trying to weaponize and twist that particular social issue for their own cause. And I think there's always going to be people who are claiming to speak for God, twisting scripture. Jesus says they're false Christ, false messiahs who are really after power, and they rule through fear. But what Jesus says is this, and I think this is something that we have to remind ourselves: the one who endures to the end will be saved. That the call Jesus gives is not to freak out. The call Jesus gives is not to go in a bunker and, go with our little dried food and munitions and lock and load, getting ready. No, the word he gives us is endure to the end. Stay faithful. Endure to the end. Endure the tribulation. Endure the hardship. Endure the persecution. Endure the deception. And the one who endures to the end will be saved. So when you turn on the news and you see shutdowns, you see political corruption and instability, you see wars and rumors of wars, you see chaos, it does very much feel like the world is unraveling. That these institutions that we've looked to for generations as a sign of national identity look like they very well could, in a very short amount of time, in a single generation, come crumbling to the ground. Remember the words of Jesus. Jesus is not surprised by any of this. The question isn't, when will it end? The question, I think, becomes, how am I going to live until it does end? And so maybe our call today is not to determine timelines of when the government shutdown is going to end, or to try to guess how the Gaza war is going to come to an end, or even trying to predict the return of Christ, although that's in vogue now as well. I think the call for us is not to try to decode any timeline, but for you and I to simply stay faithful. To stay faithful to the gospel, to stay faithful to our calling, to stay faithful as witnesses for Christ, to stay faithful to our families. And you and I are not in control. There is no amount of information that you could ever consume through this podcast or any other podcast that's going to help you be more in control of any of these things. You're not in control. I'm not in control. There's meetings about this stuff. You're probably not going to get invited into any of those meetings. I don't think we have any congressmen that listen to this podcast or diplomats that listen to this podcast. So most of us are not going to have any say in how any of this stuff comes to an end. But we don't have to be in control. We're called to keep watch. And we're called to be faithful over that little sphere of influence that God has given us. And so perhaps the best thing that we can do is ask ourselves, am I being faithful with what God's put in front of me right here, right now? Because Christ is coming, and when he comes back someday, we're going to stand before him, and what we're going to answer for is not how informed we were with all of the conflicts going around our world, although I do think it is important to be informed. What we're going to answer for is how obedient we were to the calling that he gave us to be witnesses for him and to make disciples of Christ. And so, there we have it. Stalemate, word of the day. Shutdowns, wars. It's a lot. But maybe that's the point, that this world is groaning and eagerly awaiting its redemption. But God is not concerned. There are no oops moments with God. And even when governments fall apart or nations go to war, the kingdom of God keeps advancing. And it is advancing steadily. In some ways, it's advancing quietly. But it's only advancing through people who are keeping the faith and refuse to lose it, to the ones who endure to the end. So, there you have it. Hope and pray you're well. Hope and pray your family is well. I should probably go check on my kids. It's fall break today. I took the afternoon off to watch my kids, and I gave them like an hour. Hey, Dad's going to go record a podcast, and I hear them squabbling. So speaking of my sphere of influence, I should probably go be dad to these kids. But anyway, thanks for hanging with me on this solo episode. If something here has maybe sparked some thoughts or edified you in any way, or you've got questions or concerns or cries of outrage, anything like that, send us an email, beardsandbiblepodcast@gmail.com. And I hope and pray that you're blessed. And see you again next time, hopefully with Gabe on the other end. God bless you.